All right, greetings from Colorado, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this month's presentation, which is going to be on Access and SQL, your internet, your .NET Internet Data Hub. And so what I'm going to do here is to take an Access and SQL application and extend it into a web mobile app application relatively easily and using free tools from Microsoft. And hopefully this will be of some interest to people. And I will try to stop at periodic points and ask if there are any questions that I can answer. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A. This is one of my favorite graphics, the move from the floppy diskette or the on-site data source to the cloud. My name is George Young. I'm the Vice President of the Denver Area Access Users Group, which is an Access User Group based here in the Denver area. We have about 30 paid members. We're a physical user group that meets here at the Microsoft offices once a month. We joined Meetup, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, to kind of extend our presence. And we have over 100 Meetup members. So as you can see, 100 to 30, we have about 70 people that have joined us via Meetup, but don't actually physically participate. And so we took advantage of the work that Juan and Lucy have done at AccessUserGroups.org, and we recently became, I believe, the first sort of physical user group to be on Access User Groups. And the idea is that we will be able to reach people who would otherwise not come to our meetings, and then also we'll have the archived presentations for people to look at later. So we just joined in January and did a test presentation. It went pretty well. Last month we were canceled because of snow, or I should say last week. So we're excited about that. I'm an independent consultant with a company called Dawson Butte Software. I do primarily .NET data-driven applications, which include Access and SQL. And if you have any questions or comments or thoughts, please feel free to email me at that address right there, gcyoung@dawsonbutte.net. All right, here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about Access in the cloud and .NET world, free tools for ASP.NET development, building an ASP.NET web app against an Access SQL backend. We'll have a real quick 2-minute overview of what is MVC and deploying to Azure. If we have time, we'll look at Power BI, and then we'll do some Q&A. So Access in the cloud and .NET world, as Satya Nadella has emphasized ever since he took over 2 years ago, that the focus of Microsoft is mobile first and cloud first. And it's interesting if you look at what's happened with Microsoft Office, which has been the delivery vehicle for Access since at least 1994, I believe. Access is kind of left out in the cold. So we have online versions of Word and PowerPoint and Excel. There are mobile versions of OneDrive and SharePoint lists and OneNote. But Access has kind of not really had the emphasis or the focus that the other Office applications have. And so one question that I know a lot of our Access developers here have is, so what is actually happening with Access, and what are the options that we have? Interestingly, once we have our Access application hitting a SQL Server backend, the fact that data is no longer in an AACDB data format, but rather in SQL Server. If that SQL Server is exposed to some extent to the internet, then we can go ahead and make use of that data, which drives the Access Forms application, to do a whole bunch of other things and get our Access data all kinds of places that it would not be able to go otherwise. So the database in a SQL Server backend that's internet connected can become a backend for any app anywhere. So whether Microsoft Access, well, it's even in a cloud-first, mobile-first world, Access, as we all know, does some things really, really well. And these are things that we do today against a SQL Server backend. It's a fantastic database designer. And it also has marvelous forms rendering engine. So it's great for designing and developing databases, and it's great for users to interact with that data. So there are still really good roles for the Access client application in this mobile-first, cloud-first world. And we'll take a look at one way that data application can be extended. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this SQL backend and we're going to turn it into an ASP.NET web app. One of the really great things about the highly competitive world that Microsoft finds itself in right now is the fact that they've made so much absolutely free. So, for example, as Juan mentioned last month, and it has multiple times, we have a full version of SQL Server, SQL Server Express, which we can use for development and also for small workgroup deployment. If we need a more robust version of SQL, there is a SQL Server Developer Edition for $60, and you can buy the application key from the Microsoft Store online and immediately deploy it. And that has the full SQL suite of analysis tools and such. But if you just need a robust SQL Server database, SQL Server Express is free. Visual Studio, which traditionally has been a rather pricey development environment, Microsoft has made free. And beginning with the recent launch of Visual Studio 2015, they have a community edition, which is full-featured. It's very similar to Professional, which costs, I think, $500. There are some things that it doesn't do, like automated testing, but it supports add-ins. It has all templates. Almost anything you can do in Visual Studio Professional, you can do in Community Edition. Microsoft has a program that just kicked off last year called Developer Essentials, Visual Studio Developer Essentials. And one of the things that they offer in that are $300 of free Azure SQL free Azure credits. So if you prorate that over a month, it's $25 a month. An Azure SQL database basic version costs $5 a month. So assuming that you just want some small databases to play around and develop with until you have a client willing to pay, you basically have 5 free cloud-hosted databases every month. In addition, Azure gives you 10 free websites a month with when you sign up. There's also Visual Studio Team Services, which is a really nice project and code management online suite of tools, and that's free. So you can actually use that as a repository for your code, and you can also use it to manage projects. You can have a bug management in there. You can do Kanban boards. You can do build testing, all kinds of interesting things, and that's free. There's also a SQL Azure migration wizard, which if we have time, we'll take a quick look at. but that would be for deploying a SQL database to Azure, and that's a free tool on CodePlex. And if you're a data nerd, it's a wonderful tool because it gives you feedback about just about every single row that's being migrated from SQL to Azure. And of course, also, if you're upsizing an Access database to SQL Server, there's the SQL Server Migration Assistant for Access. So everything you need to build, deploy, and host an ASP.NET web app built on your SQL Server backend is free. And we'll take a look at those quickly in just a minute. So how do we build an ASP.NET web app against an Access SQL backend? There's basically 3 easy steps. And it's actually, as you'll see, it's almost ridiculous how easy this is. We use a Visual Studio template, and we do this in just a few clicks. So there are 3 things we do. We create a blank application. Then we add a data source to connect to the SQL database. And then we generate our web app using wizards. The web app is an MVC, or Model View Controller architecture. And we'll quickly see how that works. I want to give a quick 2-minute overview of what MVC is for anybody that's not familiar with it. It's a buzzword. If you've been around the web at all, I'm sure you've heard it. MVC stands for Model View Controller. It's basically an architecture for how you architect a data-driven application. So there are 3 pieces: models, views, and controllers. Models are code mappings of database tables. So when a model is built, it gets a reference to a table in your database and turns it into a class or an object. So for example, if you have a person table, when Visual Studio builds that model, then you have a person object. And then any fields that you have in that table, let's say you have first name, last name, phone number, those become properties on that person object. One of the nice things about this mapping is that you then access your data using object property syntax. So for example, you would say person dot first name, and you would get the first name back. Person dot phone number, and you get the phone number back. So a model basically provides the mapping by which your application talks to the database. So it's a level of abstraction. So Giorgio asks, are you talking about like VBA? So it is exactly analogous to if you created an object in VBA. Yes. The language isn't VBA. There are 2 primary languages that you can use in the .NET development world. One is Visual Basic.NET, or VB.NET, which maps very, very well to VBA, both in terms of the objects and in terms of the language syntax. The other one is C#. No, this is not Access Web Apps. In fact, that's a great question. So Giorgio asked if this is not web apps. No, it's not. I have a longer version of this presentation that I've done for Access Days here in the States, and we talk about that. And basically, the Access Web Apps, what they do is that they do a great job of building a web UI on top of an Access database, but they're very limited. You're very constrained in what you can do beyond that. You basically have to work with macros. You cannot use an object-oriented language like VB or VBA. It also has to be hosted in SharePoint. And also, you don't have very much control over the SQL database at all because the Access Web App service basically manages that. It's in our experience, it's great for a small work group or organization that already has SharePoint implemented. But in terms of being a broad-based web access platform for your data, Unfortunately, it doesn't really match that. So those are the models, basically mappings of database. If you want to visualize it, sort of your data flows out of your database through these models into your views. So the second thing we have are views, and views are basically CRUD form, create, I'm having a brain freeze, create, read, update, and delete forms, allowing the user to interact with the data. So those are basically your forms. They're views. They're in HTML. They're not in an access form, but they map very, very closely to an access form. And then controllers are the third piece. And a controller basically routes an HTTP request to the appropriate model and view and adds any business logic. So for example, a request comes into myaccessapp.net/person. That route /person gets handled by a controller. And then that controller says, okay, you requested person. I'm going to go to this model, the person model. I'm going to do a query, some sort of query, and that's the business logic. And then I'm going to route that populated model, that data, to your view, to your form. So that's MVC in a nutshell. So let's take a look quickly at what this looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio. I'm running Enterprise Edition, but we could do the exact very same thing in the free Community Edition. So let's take a look actually at what this Access database looks like first. So this is a small sample database that I use. It makes use of, as you might recognize, the old Northwind database, and I took out just the orders. So if we have a quick look at the relationships here, which I probably don't have set up. I don't. But this is hitting the SQL backend, but you can see we have orders here, and orders sort of drive everything. Every order has a customer. Every order has a bunch of order details. Every order has an employee. And each order detail has a product. So I have here just an order summary. And you can see I have the order information and then the order details down below in a subform. And if I just page down, you can see that I'm doing that. So this is hitting my local SQL database. I'm going to launch SQL Server Management Studio, and I'm going to hit this database just to show you that we are doing this. So here is, I have Northwind Orders AUG, Access User Groups, that I created just for this. So let's go down to Orders, and I'm just going to say edit the top 200 rows. And you can see we have Karen Toe here, so we'll call her Karen Toe Remy. And I'll go back over here to my access form, hit F5, and you can see now the ship name is Karen Toe Remy. So we're hitting this local SQL database from this access forms application. Go ahead and delete that back. And F5 this. Okay, so that's the database. Let's go ahead and see how easy it is to turn this into an ASP.NET web application. So here I am in Visual Studio. I'll go ahead and close this. So I want to go to create a new project. So I'll go File, New, File, New, Project. Let me go back to my PowerPoint slide so we can see what we're doing here. So we're going to create a blank ASP.NET application. So we go to Web, ASP.NET application, and I will call this Northwind orders AUG. Okay. So this is going to create this application initially in kind of a blank state. And what we do next is we pick from templates to define what sort of pre-populated functionality we want in this application. So I've got tons of template options up here: empty, web forms, MVC, web API, yada, 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 Azure, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to do the MVC. That's the straightforward web app. And I want to highlight something on the right here. We're not going to do this, but by default, the MVC app gives you user authentication. And it gives you a couple different types. You can use individual user accounts, which are basically local database accounts for that application, just like you might have a table in your Access database or your SQL Server with passwords. You can also use work and school accounts, such as Office 365 accounts. So, for example, if your client is in Office 365, they automatically have an Azure Active Directory account, which is what this works against. And so you can immediately authenticate based on an existing Active Directory account. You can use the classic NTLM Windows authentication. We're just going to say no authentication for now. But that is a very, very nice feature that you have. Certainly one of the issues with Access is, okay, how do we manage authentication and access? A number of different ways of doing that. This is nice. There's a robust way of doing it out of the box. So we've clicked MVC. We're not doing authentication, and we're going to say OK. And now what this is going to do is to basically bootstrap this application for us. What happens with Visual Studio is when you install Visual Studio on your machine, you also get a local web server. So you don't have to do any configuration of setting up, Internet Information Services and so forth and so on. You can just, boom, out of the chute, you have a web server. So we've just generated this blank app that comes up with a help page. So I'm going to go ahead and close this help page here, and I'm going to direct your attention over here to the project on the right. And I want you to see three things. Here's a folder called Controllers. Here's a folder called Models, and here's a folder called Views. When we generate the models, the views, and the controllers, they go into those folders. By default, we only have a home controller. We only have, a home set of views with index, contact, and about. If I hit Control F5, which will basically it'll build and launch this web app locally. You'll see how those controllers and views map. So just going to wait for it to load here. And this is the default blank application that we get just by picking MVC. And you can see here I have at the top Home, About, and Contact. So let's click on Contact. And I want you to notice that in the address bar, it went to Home Contact. If we go back over to our application in Visual Studio, you can see that here in the controller, this is a home controller, and there is a contact method. So this is that routing that I talked about. The controllers intercepts the request. It says, oh, home controller, okay, that's home. Do I have a method called contact? I sure do. What am I supposed to do? Put a message in there and then return the view. That view is going to be the contact view. So if I come down to views, here's the contact view. And you can see it's just some HTML. And it says up at the top, address 1 Microsoft Way, and then a couple of email addresses, which maps to what we have here. So that's our basic application set up with no data. Now let's hook up that data to it. The second step that we have is to add an ADO.NET data source by connection to SQL database. So I'm going to come back over to my Visual Studio. Go ahead and close these up. And we're going to go to the controllers folder. We're going to go to the models folder, and we're going to create our model by going Add ADO.NET Entity Data Model. Enter. We can call it whatever we want. We'll just leave the defaults. And we're going to pick what type of model we have. And we can do code-first models, which are actually really kind of bizarre when you first encounter them. But basically, you can start by writing a class and have that class turn into a database table. But we're going to generate our model from a database. So we're going to pick this first guy here. And now we need to connect. So here we have our old friend, the connection string. I'm going to go ahead and point to my local database. And I'm going to go to a database name. And you'll recall it's Northwest Orders AUG. And I'll test the connection. Looking good. All I'm doing is connecting to my local database here. And we'll let it be called Northwest Orders OG Entities. Next. Entity Framework 6, that's the default, fine. And now what it's actually gone is it's gone and talked to our SQL backend database on our Access application. And it's retrieved all the metadata that it can find. And notice that it found customers, employees, order details, and order tables. So let's go ahead and say, yeah, we want to include all those in our model. And we'll just call this with an orders OG model. Again, that's just for our own internal conventions. We can keep the defaults. So now what it's doing is it's actually going to generate a full model based on those 5 tables in Visual Studio. And let's go ahead and click here and see what that looks like. So interesting, this looks quite a bit like our relationships view in Access. But you can see what it's done is it's basically said, okay, here's the order table. And notice the order table is related to customer in a one-to-many relationship. Right here. It's related to employee in a one-to-many relationship. It's related to order detail in a one-to-many relationship. And then order detail has products in a many-to-one relationship. So that's pretty neat. So Visual Studio basically goes off and says, okay, you point me to a database, I'm going to generate a model for you. So I'm going to go ahead and close this window and do a build. And I want to show you what these classes look like really quickly, just for information's sake. Now, back to Giorgio's question about language. I'm doing this in C#. You could do it in VB if you'd like. There are pros and cons. For better or for worse, almost all of the tutorials and examples that Microsoft and third parties provide are in C#. So if you're going to spend time investing at all in doing any .NET, even though you come from a VB background and I come from a VB background, I would highly recommend C#. The syntax is a little bit, it's different, but you'll have the advantage of basically having 95% of your samples and online tutorials and courses and books and so forth are going to be in the language that you're using. In addition, you don't write a whole lot of really complicated code, as I'll show you. So the language actually is less important than the framework underneath it. So here's what a customer class looks like. And we can avoid all this diagnostic stuff. But you can see that here we have a public partial class customer. So this would be equivalent to something similar in Visual Basic. There's a constructor, and then here we have those properties. So notice we have ID, company, last name, first name, job title, all those things. So those map to the fields in the table. And then down below, we have a collection of orders. What that is a customer has orders. And so what this model generator did for us automatically is it provided the linked tables, if you will. The related tables are also mapped in the class. So if we go over to order, you can see here we have the normal order properties. Those are all of our fields in the database. It added SSMA timestamp, as I'm sure you know, is when you use the migration assistant to upsize a database from Access to SQL. And here we have customer and employee. So every order has one customer. Every order has one employee. So they're just straight properties of type customer and employee. But then here we have this collection again of order details. So there's a one-to-many relationship that's mapped as a collection. So that's our model. And again, I think so far, I'm very long-winded, so I would say 95% of the time since we started is me talking. We've actually probably spent less than 2 minutes actually doing anything in the UI, and we haven't written any code yet. We clicked a couple of buttons to create the blank application. We right-clicked on the model folder in this blank application and pointed to a SQL database and said, generate me an ADO.NET Entity model. And that's what we've done so far. The last thing we're going to do now is generate that user interface based on those models. And then we'll be done. So let me come back here. So now we're in our UI. Back in our development environment. And again, we have controllers, models, and views. So we're going to go ahead and go to the controller folder, and we're just going to generate an orders view in controller. So you'll notice that here under controllers we just have a home controller, and here under views we just have home and then shared, which is basically just common layout stuff. So we really only, in terms of what we actually render, it's really only home. So now we're going to generate for orders. So let's right-click here and go, and I will answer questions in just a second here. I apologize for not catching those. So we're going to add a new scaffolded item. So this is the last bit of wizardry that we do. The first wizardry that we do is the connection wizard to set up the ADO.NET Entity Data Model. And the second wizard that we do is to basically add the controllers and views. So we go add new scaffolded item. And we say MVC controller with views using entity framework. Now what's going to happen when we do this is that the Visual Studio is going to generate a controller for the table that we want, orders in this case, and it's going to generate automatically all the views that we want for that controller. So CRUD, create, read, delete, and update, all automatically for us. So we're going to pick MVC controller, we go add, and now we'd say what class or what table do we want? We said order. The data context class, that's what we identified at the very beginning. So that's the Northwind orders aug entities. The data context class is basically what wires up our application to the database. In this case, we're saying, get this data from this local SQL Server database. And finally, what do we want the controller name to be? Orders controller. MVC uses a naming convention that anything that you name followed by controller, it becomes a controller addressable with just that name. So in this case, it's orders controller, but we'll reference it using just orders when we talk to it in the browser. And let's just go add, and let's watch what happens over here on the right, both on the controllers folder and on the views folder. So you see we now have an orders controller.cs, and we have under orders in views, under the orders folder here, we have create, delete, details, edit, and index. Index is just a view of all of the orders. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So I'm going to hit build, debug. I'm going to hit start without debugging, Control F5, so that's going to launch the application. And here we go. It's going to orders index. And there is all of the data laid out in a table in the index view. So this is essentially a view of all the orders in our system. Now it's not beautiful. If I go widescreen, maybe it looks a little bit more beautiful. But you can see here, I can see over here on the far right, I have links. So here is my detail for that order. You can see order date, ship name, and so forth and so on. Let me go back. If I want to edit it, I click edit. Notice that it automatically gave me drop downs for the lookup for both the employee and the customer. You'll recall from the access form, that the order has every order has one employee and one customer. And so what Visual Studio did in that wizard is it basically generated a drop down of all the employees and a drop down of all the companies, the customer companies. So I can quickly come in and edit that, make changes to that. I can also delete it. So there's my delete functionality. It asks me for a confirmation. I'll just say no, I don't want to delete it. And I can also create a new order. And again, I pick employee, company, put in dates, and so forth and so on. So that is basically what that looks like. Now, just for fun, again, just to emphasize how this is all wired together. So here we have Karen Toe. I'm going to edit this, and I change her again to Karen Toe Ray Me. And I'm going to go ahead, scroll down, and click Save. And let's go back to our Access application. And here we have Karen Toe. I'm going to hit F5. There's Karen Toe Ray Me. And we'll just call her Karen Toe. Okay. So I've made it changed now in Access. So it's Karen Toe. Let's go back to our website, hit F5, and keep an eye on this first row, on this first box up here. And now it's just Karen Toe. So what we have here is we still have this rich Access client application that we can use to drive this backend database that also has this web application running on it. Now, let me just quickly show you about the mobile functionality here. So I'm going to go ahead and resize my browser and make it about mobile phone width, and watch what happens here. I don't know. Well, you probably didn't notice, but what it did is it actually dropped all of the UI elements into a vertical layout so that the label is now above the list box or the text box. If I come back and make it wider, you can see that now it's displaying it that way. So this application is now fully mobile friendly. So not only can somebody who doesn't have an Access client get to this in a web browser on a PC or a Mac or a Linux box, but in addition, they can get to it from their Android phone, their iPhone, or their Windows phone, just via the URL. Let me pause here and see if there are questions that I can answer. Let me see, chat. Lucy, feel free to jump in and tell me what I need to do here to do that. Let's see. Let's see how I can chat here.
Okay. Is it not showing up?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't have my window. I'm not able to pop up the chat window here. Do I need to close? Oh, there it is. I'm sorry.
You.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, let's see. VBA classes, not access web apps, and that's the protection that AWAs provide. In this case, you have to learn ASP.NET, don't you? So, yes, so there is a learning curve here. Now I know Access developers that have started down this path. I can think of two in specific. One with whom I work locally, and one whom I know who lives overseas, that have started learning sort of basic ASP.NET just as a way of leveraging their database skills onto a new platform. And I think what they're finding from their client base is that many clients are starting to say, well, what about the web? What about phones? And so I think what their hope is that they'll be able to build up at least a basic skill set that will allow them to begin to deliver at least pieces of the functionality to internet-connected devices that aren't full PC clients. One of the scenarios that we see, and we have a big project here in Denver, huge government entity that handles public works in the city of Denver, and they have had an internal access application for quite some time. But as you can imagine, in public works, they have quite a few people out in the field, and what they want to do is to allow those people out in the field to do some very, very rudimentary data entry and reading. So what we're doing is a two-step process. First of all, we take that Access backend and we turn it into a SQL Server backend in the cloud. In this case, we're hosting it in Azure. And the second thing we're doing is providing just pieces of that functionality in that database on the web. So some very, very basic stuff like price quote lookups, which are a small piece of the entire Access application functionality. And the idea is that, again, that it's pretty straightforward to do. You can see here, I didn't write a single line of code, and we're looking at a full CRUD interface for orders. And I think it took, if you forget about me blabbing on, it probably took less than 5 minutes to do all that. But yes, you do have to learn some rudimentary ASP.NET. You'll have to be somewhat comfortable with HTML. You'll have to be somewhat comfortable with CSS. Giorgio says you have to still write classes and languages other than VBA. That's beyond my knowledge, and that of many Access Power User developers. Yes, I think you're right. there's a subset of Access developers that do object-oriented class-type development, but I think it's probably, a minority. But in this scenario where you have basically Visual Studio generating the classes for you, you never actually write a class. You just use the properties to talk to the class. So I'm not sure. I get it. The C# code we just saw is built for you, or you have to write it. I did not write any code. Everything was written for me. Now let me quickly show you what it would look like to write some code. So let's go back to just the orders table, and let's just look at Karen Toe's order. And if we compare that to our application here, to our Access app, you'll notice that we don't have the orders. I'm sorry. I need to go to an order, don't I? This is order. Okay, company AA orders. Let's see. I assume this is this. I'm sorry, I don't have a form for this. But let's say that we wanted to see the order details for this order. Again, to do this level of customization, this is sort of kind of the most that you'll do. So please don't feel overwhelmed by what we're doing, because this is kind of, at the upper end of what you'll want to do if you do want to do this. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to add information from a related table. So we're going to go to the order details table for this order. Quickly show you what that looks like. I'm going to close the chat window for now and the participants window. So let's go to the orders and we're to the details page. And this is the HTML. Again, I don't want to, HTML, you're talking about maybe 30 tags that you have to learn. So H2 headings, div, H4 is a heading, HR horizontal line, DL is a definition list, and the other element we're going to do is a table. So we're just going to go down here, okay, and we're in the view now. We're in the details view. And we're just going to say, okay, let's create a table, okay, and we're just going to say, and this is where the syntax, I'm going to write a little bit of C# and you can kind of, think about what this looks like in VB. It's going to be very similar. So at for each, and I'm going to use a variant data type, var detail in model dot order details. So again, this is where that automatic mapping. We're in the order model, and you remember when we looked at the class, it said, oh, the order model has all these properties, but it also has this related table of order details. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now in C# I put in the little brackets. In VB, of course, you wouldn't. And let's just create a table row, and we'll just say detail dot product dot product name. Now you can see here the power of this class syntax. You notice that to get the product name in an order detail, which is in a related table of a related table, I went detail, get me the product. That product is a pointer to that related table, and I got the product name. Okay, we'll just do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back over to my browser and hit F5 to refresh. And there you can see I have beer and dried plums, which is an interesting diet. So that's as easy as that. Now I would go ahead and add other information, unit price, quantity. Let me quickly show you what that looks like. So I'll just do another table cell. Again, this is the extent of the stuff you have to do. Detail, oops, and notice I'm getting autocomplete. Detail dot quantity. It gives me the autocomplete. So it does all that lookup. So essentially what I'm doing here is writing SQL, but I'm doing it in a classical object property syntax. Detail dot unit price. Yes, var is a variant data type. So this in VB, this would be something like detail as var or detail as variant. I could have also said for each order detail if I wanted to strongly type it, but I'm just going to put var. So I can either declare it as a variant or I can strongly type it as what it is. So let's go ahead and go back over here. I've added quantity and unit price, and I'll hit F5. And there we have 100, and we have 14. The @sign, Giorgio asked what the @sign. The @sign takes me from HTML into code. So it allows me to basically embed code in my HTML. So I have this declarative HTML here for a table, and I have this declarative HTML here for a table row with 3 table cells, and then embedded in that, I can actually have code. So another thing I can do, and again, I don't want to spend too much time with this, but just to get the power, I can actually say, okay, this is going to be detail.unit price. Let me go ahead and surround this whole thing in a parens to show that I'm actually operating on the code everywhere, detail.quantity. So in theory now what I've done is just purely in code, and obviously he's not happy. Okay, so I need to change this to decimal. Okay, so I had to coerce that type to be the same as the other one, right? I had a currency type here, and I had a long type here. And okay, so I'm just basically doing some inline calculation. I'm calculating the total. So let's go here in F5. And in theory, we should have 100 units of beer at $14 a pop. That should be 1,400. So there you go, 1,400. The decimal places I can control using format strings and so forth and so on. But that's a very easy way of accessing any kind of related data using that object property syntax. Okay. I do want to show quickly how easy it is to get this thing into Azure. So here I am in my local SQL Server database where I've done all my development, and now I'm ready to put it in Azure. I right-click, and I go Tasks, and I go Deploy Database to Windows Azure SQL Database. It's that easy. And so within SQL Server Management Studio, I can just say, pop this puppy up in Azure, and I'm done. I've got my database in the cloud. Similarly, in my Visual Studio, I go right-click, Publish, and I just deploy up to Azure by selecting which application I want to work with. So that's it. And there's some other stuff that unfortunately we didn't have time to get to, like the Power BI. But I hope this gives an idea of at least how easy it is to leverage your Access and your SQL backend work into a much broader possible user base for your application, or a subset of your full application. What we see here locally with this one big government client is that they want to keep that big, beautiful, rich, Star Trek Commander's Deck Access client. They love it, but they want to allow a certain amount of functionality on the web. And in this case, you can see that in a matter of just a few minutes or so, we were able to get, at least some basic order creation and editing up there. So let me go back to chat here and see if there are any more questions. Okay, so if anybody wants to jump in vocally, please do so.
You go to the ballet. If you would please indulge me a moment. The president said that diplomacy is the creation of war by other means. I reject that conclusion. Diplomacy is worse than that.
Okay, if there are no questions, then thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
That wasn't, and you know what, in some ways, I mean, it's not that you don't want the increase, but.
I don't know if that's a question or background noise.
I think it was just background noise, George.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me at that email address, which is gcyoung@dawsonview.net. Thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you all again here online.
Thank you very much, George.
Oh, there's one question I can answer.
No, just thank you. I just wanted to
So
say
Giorgio says juggling C# and HTML, and you're exactly right. This assumes a basic rudimentary familiarity with C# and HTML. Absolutely. Now there are two really great resources out there, and I'm going to go ahead and pop the browser and go there. One is called Microsoft Virtual Academy, and it's microsoftvirtualacademy.com, and it is a absolutely free website that has tons of very, very good streaming on-demand courses. So here, for example, C# fundamentals for absolute beginners, database fundamentals, and these are delivered in 20 to 40-minute modules. If I search for MVC here, are a couple of really good introductory MVC courses. So Introduction to ASP.NET MVC. So fantastic free resources there to get familiar with that. There's also Pluralsight. So if you sign up for the Visual Studio Developer Essentials, which is free, and it's at visualstudio.com Developer Essentials, one of the things that you get is training, which includes Pluralsight, which is normally, I think, $30 a month. And I'm sorry, I'm scrolling quickly trying to see where it is. Oh, there you go, Pluralsight. You probably can't see it. It's this little guy over here. But you get basically, I think, 3 to 6 free months of Pluralsight. And Pluralsight, again, has some fantastic training and everything. You've got SQL training, you've got, web training, you've got broad database training, you can, do .NET training, C# training, Visual Basic .NET training. So those are two fantastic resources, MicrosoftVirtualAcademy.com and Pluralsight.com, which is free after you've signed up for your Visual Studio Developer Essentials. Giorgio, I think the ideal thing, I think they were really close with Access Web Apps. They just needed to not make it SharePoint dependent, and then open it up so that it was just hosted in a regular Azure SQL database, and you could actually edit the code. All kinds of theories as to why they did it the way they did, but you're right. I mean, this is kind of an interesting complement to that. But you're exactly right. It requires a certain amount of HTML and a certain amount of either C# or VB.NET. At least you have an idea of what it takes. So if you do get into a scenario where you do have a client who wants you to do a little bit of web stuff, at least you kind of know what's involved, and you can, hopefully find somebody local who's reliable, a web guy who could take it on for you if you didn't feel like you wanted to undertake that yourself. Okay. I apologize. I've run over. Any other questions?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
So you had a grid view that was generated by code before. Can you go behind that in HTML and adjust the widths of the columns traditionally, if you had to?
Yes. So I'll go ahead and close the chat window, and I'll go to that index view. And so you can see here, again, if you're not comfortable with HTML, it's a little daunting. So it does presume that, but here's a table, and then we have THs, which are header rows, and then we have TDs, which are table displays. And if we go back to this guy in the browser, this is what he looks like. So the question was, can you edit widths and so forth and so on? Yes, absolutely. In fact, in this case, maybe we decide that on this view, we certainly don't want SSMA timestamp, and we probably, maybe we don't want dates. We just want some stuff. So I could actually come in here and just delete that. So I'll go up here. Here's a TD, open TD, close TD. Boom. Bye-bye SSMA timestamp. come up here, open TH, close TH, SSMA timestamp. Save it, come back, hit F5. And now you can see my timestamp is gone. I can similarly adjust widths. I can adjust the font size. I can adjust the colors.
Okay, and the attribute you can put right in those lines.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So I could set a width here in the cell, or I could set a global width by using cascading style sheets or CSS up at the top. Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thanks. Have a great evening or a great morning if you're in Italy, and thank you for joining us.